Good morning, everyone. I'm just wanting to take you guys through some of my process of creating a class. So yesterday I started this and want to share it with you. I always start with the reset. If you're familiar with the Lit Yoga method, we reset at the very beginning to reestablish a neutral spine, neutral pelvis, and really set ourselves up for success. A lot of times when we start moving and we haven't done that, we're moving from maybe behind the starting line. And so if we just take a few minutes at the very beginning, going through this developmental sequence that is called the reset, to get our posture, to get our core integration, it'll really help our movement patterns and help us feel better. And when we feel better, we're usually better people, but we also have more energy. And who doesn't want that? So I'm going to take you through this. So what I was, having worked with some private clients last week, and then just over the years, knowing that hip rotation is actually quite limited for a lot of people. That has to do with, again, the position of the pelvis. So if you tend to be a little bit pitched in your pelvis, I'm exaggerating it. Orlando's doing a good job here. A little pitched in your pelvis. The pelvis is this big section of the skeleton. And when it tips forward, it closes off some of the inherent mobility of the hip joint. So the hip is where the femur, thigh bone, comes up and meets the pelvis. It kind of goes inside the cave of the pelvis, the acetabulum. There's a hole there, so it's called a ball and socket joint. So the position of the pelvis will impact your hip mobility. That makes sense, right? Because the joint of the hip is where pelvis meets femur. And so if the pelvis is not in its starting neutral position, it impacts the hip. So we first really want to establish neutral pelvis. And so I've seen so many people who have lived in anterior tilt for a long time, and they become really restricted in hip movement. So not only in hip flexion, but in rotation. So external and internal rotation is needed for a lot of movement that we're turning, and the hip joint needs to have that freedom to move. Also, hip rotation is going to create some torque, some power. So people like golfers, throwing a football, things like that, you're going to need that mobility in your hip. Now, if you don't have that adequate mobility in your hip, you'll try and garner it somewhere else. So you'll get it maybe from your back, right? So a lot of golfers that I've worked with have spoken about how they try and move too much in their back when they don't get that drive from the hip. All of that is to say, what I'm going to do right now is just to show you a real simple abdominal exercise. So this is like one-stop shop, so efficient. It gets your core engaged. So core is not just your abs. It's all of this center of the body from the base of the pelvis to the shoulder girdle. And the reason why it's so important is it's our center. So the position of our pelvis will impact the core, but the core engagement will help us hold our pelvis together more. And then it's kind of like building blocks, then we'll have more of a chance of standing taller, getting our neck in alignment, all of that. So we start off, I hope you can hear me well. We're going to start off on our back. Bring your hands on your thighs, press the thighs away, slide the hairline of the back of your skull away from your shoulders. So you're not trying to double chin, but just feel length. Press into your hands and lift your pelvis up. So you'll notice I'm trying to keep the pelvis level, not tipping, and that helps to hold the ribs in and get the glutes firing, right? So if you tip your pelvis, you're going to summon your back to do more of the work. And if your feet are too close, that always happens. And I'll tell you from my experience of seeing people, I just want to see, if somebody can just give me a yes, you can hear me. My AirPods are on. Can you hear me? I know it's like a delayed reaction. There's a lot of hearts. You guys are so cute. I just like to cite it. Here I am. Literally, I have not brushed my hair. Brushed my teeth, but not my hair. Okay, good. You can hear me. And I just have been I'm just going through my Instagram messages and my email box, and I'm about to go on a 3-hour Zoom call, so maybe I'm like avoiding that. No, it's going to be amazing. But I just wanted to share some of the process of this because it also made me feel so good, this thing I did yesterday. All right, so moving along, I will go back because you can hear me. So we're going to go onto our back and come up into bridge. So this again lengthens the back, activates the glutes, and believe me, when you have your posture, your pelvis neutral, that helps your posture, but it helps your breathing. So you don't have to sit and practice pranayama because you need to realign your entire skeleton and the tissues that surround it so that the diaphragm, the muscles of respiration, will be in a better position to serve you. So this is where you practice your breathing. All right, so the other thing I like to do when I'm in bridge is just to wobble the legs a little bit. And what we're doing here is just getting the heat in the synovial fluid kind of starting to wash over, free up our hips. So especially if you feel like you're really sticky and stiff in your hip joints, do a little wobbling or flapping of the legs. And you can even put your fingers on the sides of your hips, right where your gluteus medius is, and feel it start to spark. All right, so then we're going to lower to the floor. Now this is the abdominal work that I really loved yesterday I was doing. So cup your skull and squeeze the elbows in. And I say that because a lot of people tend to have their elbows too far out. And if you pull the elbows in and sit your head back, you're not going to pull in your neck. So here we go. Big inhale. Exhale, come up off the shoulders. So I'm not pulling on my head. I'm pressing into my sacrum and drawing, and I'm looking. Look here and see. Are you poking the belly up? Pull the abdominal wall together and then lower. Exhale and lift. So I'm coming up, pressing into the sacrum, and I'm going to straighten the left leg. So I call these stabilizer abs because everything is stabilizing as we begin to move the limb. And then lower. Inhale and lower. Exhale and lift. Then I'll do the right leg. Everything's stabilizing. You shouldn't feel any tip in your pelvis, and your chin is not trying to do the work for you. Lower that foot. Inhale and lower. Uh-oh, somebody's growling here. I'm not growling, but okay, you want to go outside? Exhale, lift up off the shoulders. And then we'll straighten this left leg again. And this is what I was doing that felt so great. So with the leg extended, internally rotate. You'll feel like, wow, that is hard to do in this flexed position of the hip and extended position of the knee. But boy, does that feel great. Then come back to neutral, put the foot down and lower. Exhale and lift. Right leg will straighten. Right hip internally rotates. It gives you an opportunity to compare left to right. Maybe even put your fingers over in the outside of the hip and help that internal rotation. Sometimes you'll even feel it all the way in the sacrum. Put the foot down and lower. Exhale and lift. Straighten. Now I'm going to do the opposite. Externally rotate. How does that feel? And notice if you tend to try and want to drop over, hold strong on that right oblique. Back to neutral and put the foot down. Now skipping ahead, I would do that on the right side as well. The next time I come up, I'm going to straighten the left leg, internally rotate, lower the leg a little bit, really putting demand on the obliques. Externally rotate, lift it back up. Internally rotate, lower. Externally rotate, lift. Then come back to neutral and lower. And then we'll do it on the other side. Exhale and lift. Straighten the leg. Internally rotate, lower. Externally rotate, lift. Internally rotate. Ooh, this feels so good on that right side. Lower. Externally rotate, lift. Back to neutral. Put the foot down. So playing around with that the movement of the hip in one plane as you also add some rotation to it. All right, so then the process from there was I just added on. And so I created a whole flow around that. We did some fun things. So I'm going to be putting this on my Lit Daily, but one of the things I did with that internal, external in mind is coming into, this is in the flow, by the way, so we've gotten warmer and warmer. But I came into a fingertip crescent, and I did this external rotation of the left hip and internal of the right. So I've warmed up for this. And then coming back, slid this leg, the left leg back, and slid the right leg into hip abduction and tapped the right shoulder. So then we come back, right foot, left foot, and then we twizzle, that's what I'll say, the hips, coming on the fingertips, come back, one-legged plank, right leg over, left hand to the right shoulder. So this is a cool move because it's super complex. And what I'm doing is basically kind of rolling the fascia around. So that is I do get a lot of questions about how do I come up with movement, how do I come up with ideas, what do I suggest if you're really tight, what do I suggest if you're really hypermobile, and the answer is obviously slightly different, but similar in that get yourself in your neutral position, work to get a balance of the muscles around, and play, be joyful. We want to have that, there's this third quality I talk about in my teacher training. We want stability, mobility, and adaptability. And that's that ability to be like, hey, I want to get up off the ground. So I'm sitting and I want to get her on my hands and I can come around and push off my leg and then I can come down, and this adaptability, and I can do, it's freedom. That's what we're going for. And let me be clear, it's never too late to get more free. It really isn't. And in fact, when you work on getting more free in your body, you will free up some of the perceptions you have in your mind. And it really, really helps. So this is my spontaneous live for you guys today. Thank you. Y'all are writing all kinds of things. But anyway, I just like keeping it real here. Keeping it real, bedhead real. It doesn't matter because really what matters is how we feel. And you guys make me feel so lit up, and I love you all. So if you have more questions for me, I'm going to take like 3 more minutes here and answer any questions about like process, my teacher trainings, the free 20-day posture challenge that we have up on my Lit Daily, which is Kristen, my dear friend and Lit senior teacher and also physical therapist, created this. And we really were like, let's just do a 20-day challenge. Like, it is 2020. I don't think we actually, I can't remember back. Like, were we thinking 2020? Like, how do we make 2020 a better year? My goodness. Like, let's make it a better year somehow. Well, one of it is this 20-minute. We also know that change, does it happen over 20 days? Yeah, it absolutely is possible. You start resetting and reestablishing better brain mapping. You need to continue that, but that can happen with consistency. And 20 minutes is just something most people are willing to give themselves. So please give yourself that. So go on over to our Lit Yoga. You can go to lityoga.com and find it from there. But if you just go into my bio, into the little link tree, there's a link there. There's a link through Lit Yoga Method, Instagram. Anyway, how would you tackle that kind of rotation while standing? Rotation in the hip while standing is, you would just, so I guess that's what you mean, rotation of the hip while standing. I mean, you would have one leg, So you don't want to try and rotate the hip I see that working in Warrior 3 and standing split. Oh yeah, like when one leg, so I do that all the time. I'll have one leg where we're standing and the other leg, it can literally be straight and I'm doing it like that. It could also be in my first teacher training 200-hour flow that I give to everybody. I give them 10 flows and they do it. And we do this where we're internally rotating and then we come up and externally rotate. So you can work on your balance and you work on independent, look, this hip is flexing, but it's the neutral pelvis here. This one is also neutral pelvis, but it's internally rotating with a slight amount of extension. So there's different things happening. I have to do a lot of abduction. In fact, in the flow that I just made yesterday, I do abduction and I internally rotate, which is kind of it's weird when you land and you internally rotate. But this is great because this movement is the tensor fasciae lata. This is gluteus medius. This is tensor fasciae lata. Now, the tensor fasciae lata is very close to the gluteus medius. The tensor fasciae lata, if you're not familiar with it, becomes the big IT band. The IT band comes from the TFL merging with glute max fibers, and that becomes this large band that comes here and bifurcates and kind of goes across the tibia and the outer knee condyle. And it gets blamed for a lot of things, but really why the IT band, this is for another day, but why the IT band has a lot of issues is that gluteus medius, your wonderful hip stabilizer in one-legged stance, when it's not firing well, you sink over and that bows that IT band and it presses into the tensor fasciae lata, which is a flexor and internal rotator. So what I did here is I'm like, hey, know the difference, my friends. You are stabilizing and you are moving gluteus medius. You are stabilizing gluteus medius and you are moving tensor fasciae lata. That was a long answer to your question, Kendra. All right, so that's fine. It's fun to know anatomy. You don't have to be a PT to know and then really be able to get a sense of how you can move better and then how you can help other people move better if you're a teacher. So anyway, check out the postural challenge. Please write me, DM me. I try to get back to everybody with any questions or requests, comments, etc. Anyway, happy day. And thank you guys for joining and lots of love.